Hello and welcome to the COP30 sessions at High House, live from Belém in Brazil. Over 50 world leaders have been right here on this site for the past 2 days to shape the future of the planet. And I'm delighted to be joined by one of them now, Prime Minister Gaston Browne of Antigua and Barbuda. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Certainly a pleasure.
Now, for the last 2 days, presidents and prime ministers from around the world have been here making speeches, holding meetings. What do you notice about this COP, which is different to previous ones?
Well, I have to admit that the attendance is not as strong as in other COPs, but we remain very hopeful for a strong outcome. We are looking forward for increased ambitions coming from the various nations. And as they publish their NCDs, we're hoping that countries will increase the ambitions so that we can curb emissions and ultimately to bend the curve backwards so that we can contain temperatures within the 1.5 degrees. As you may be aware, we are now at that tipping point of 1.5 degrees. And for small island states, that is a significant issue for us. In fact, it is the tipping point that could result in more frequent climate events that could literally create permanent damage to our countries. And for us, we continue to hold on to that 1.5 degree threshold. And even though there has been an overshoot, we hope that it'll be temporary and that ambitions will be increased, that emissions will be reduced, and ultimately we'll see a reversal or an adjustment in temperatures so that we could protect the planet and protect human civilization.
You mentioned there the attendance. According to reports, there are 57 heads of government or heads of state here. In previous years, it's been as high as 150. Is that a concern for you? And why do you think that's happening?
Well, we have to admit that Belém is somewhat remote. Even in my case, I'd say in terms of geography, Antigua and Barbuda is about 5 hours away from Brazil.
Yeah.
But it took me about 28 hours to get here because had to travel northwards to go southwards.
Yeah.
And I imagine that that would have been one of the issues. And I presume too that the extent of the funding for this COP may not have been as strong as in the case of other COPs. So, for example, our delegation has been cut to half the size because of the costs. And I'm hoping that, again, with future COPs, we'll see the various sponsors ramping up their donations so that we can have greater participation. But I think what is important will be the outcome document and the pledges that are made. So far, we have seen a few glimmers of hope. For example, we have heard commitments coming out of Norway in which they are supporting the TFFF initiative of Brazil to support the forests here, the Amazon forests. And I'm hoping that as the COP negotiations continue, we will have increased ambitions and commitments coming from the various member states.
Yeah, absolutely. So President Lula, today writing in the Guardian newspaper, said that the era of fine speeches and good intentions is over. Now, there is a criticism that at COPs, world leaders will come, they will make grand speeches, they will make big promises, and then people leave the COP site and those promises are not fulfilled. Do you think that's the case? And have you seen anything here in Belém which would make you think things will be different this time?
Well, we can say that the 55 heads who are here, that clearly they're committed. The fact that Belém is somewhat remote and they would have taken the time out to come here and to give their various pledges and to speak about the issue of climate, the impact on human civilization, and to signal their commitment. I believe that those heads are here, that they are fully committed. I do accept that there are some heads in the past who have literally utilized the COP platform, obviously for promotional purposes, and they may not have been as committed as they ought to. And I believe, though, that there's a need for all heads globally to be fully committed to climate and to commit themselves to increasing ambitions and to reduce emissions. In fact, I'm of the view too that in order to effectively address climate change, we need an all-society approach in which voters, that they will hold their leaders accountable. Because if we're going to rely almost exclusively on the voluntary commitments of heads, then evidently that may not be as efficacious as if voters were to hold them accountable and to make sure that they exercise good environmental stewardship and leadership, failing which, they'll be punished by being voted out of office.
And are you worried that there's a movement in democracies with voters moving against the consensus that there has been on climate change really in the past 10, 20, 30 years? I mean, one very noticeable absence here, of course, is President Trump, but not just the president, the entire American delegation is not here. Now, how much of a concern is that to you in the first case? And in the second, you're concerned that that is a trend which spreads to other democracies and it becomes a new normal in the political conversation?
Well, the United States is one of the largest emitters of fossil fuels and fossil fuel gases, and one of the largest historical emitters of fossil fuel gases. I believe that they have an obligation to provide leadership on the issue of climate change. To deny the fact that climate change is real, that is clearly not the solution. In terms of some countries pursuing what they may consider to be a populist position and to deny the reality of climate change, I do not know that that's a sustainable position. I mean, clearly, the climate is reacting to all of these poisonous gases that are being dumped in the Earth's atmosphere. Whereas it is regrettable that the United States is not present here, I still remain very hopeful in the sense that at the micro-organizational level and certainly at the level of states within the US, they continue to pursue their climate agenda. Yeah. It would have been good to have had a commitment at the federal level, but in any event, it doesn't mean that climate action stops exclusively within the United States. So I believe that most like-minded nations, in fact, the greater majority of nations, are committed to address the issue of climate change. What is needed, though, is great ambitions, so that we can accelerate the transition to reduce emissions, to reduce global temperatures, and ultimately to protect our planet and to protect human civilization.
But are you worried? I think the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer yesterday warned that there was the era of consensus is gone, I think were his words. Do you agree with Keir Starmer?
Well, again, I'm an eternal optimist, and I could never agree with that. This is the very nature of these COPs, to come up with a consensus, to use diplomacy to effectively address climate change. Now, if we move away from consensus and diplomacy, then evidently the issue of climate will end up in the courts. You will know that already, that several nations have actually approached ITLAS and the ICJ, and they would have had favorable legal opinions, which would have confirmed that these large polluting states, they are committing a tort against all of humanity, that they have an obligation to protect the marine and terrestrial spaces. So if they continue to violate and that there's no opportunity for dialogue, for diplomacy, for consensus, then evidently the issue will then move from the COPs to in the courts. Yeah. And in that case, if it moved to the courts, then the actions that are required, the compensation that will be required will no longer be voluntary, but obviously they'll then have a legal obligation to compensate countries for the tort that they are committing against these countries and their respective peoples.
But is there a danger with that approach of using the international courts, which is very large, powerful countries very often choose to ignore international law when it doesn't suit them? They don't do what they're meant to, what their obligations say that they should. And you pursue them in the ICJ, and countries like America, who have great skepticism at the moment towards climate change, will just say, thanks, but no thanks. We don't recognize this judgment. We're not paying.
Well, they may be able to abuse the court process or processes using raw power. But for how long? In fact, that would not be a sustainable position. At some point, they will have to address whatever decisions the court would have come to, and they will be held liable. So I do accept that perhaps in the interim, there will be the type of knee-jerk reaction to perhaps use raw power and to ignore the decisions of the courts. But ultimately, I believe that law will prevail. And that is why, too, we are a society of laws, and we have laws in place that can curb raw power, the abuse of power. And I'm pretty sure that the abuse of power is not a sustainable position.
Yeah. And one final question. The organisers of this COP have called it several things. They've called it the implementation COP. They've called it the the Forest COP. President Lula has called it the COP of Truth. What is this COP to you?
Well, I see it as a continuum, and it's a continuum forum for advocacy and for us to continue to broaden our approach to climate to include our oceans, of course, our forests. Those are two very important aspects of the ecosystem. In fact, it's both the marine and terrestrial aspects. So I think that this COP has had a more synoptic view in terms of addressing the issue of climate. And in terms of the COP of truth, clearly, we all stand on the truth of climate change and the fact that climate change is real and that it's creating real significant impact on all of humanity. We have just seen, for example, the impact of Hurricane Melissa on Jamaica. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to come to the conclusion that climate change is real, and that at the end of the day, if we do not take proactive action to scale up funding to adapt and to mitigate, and at the same time to reduce emissions, that will be imperiling all of humanity.
Prime Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for today, but there's lots more happening here at High House over the course of COP30. We'll be looking beyond the headlines to the issues that really matter. So do join us for more.